that is only the foundation of good practice. Without much delay, I invite our facilitator, Ms. Ashika. She is a junior social officer at Talim, India, for further introduction. Over to you, Ashika.
Thank you, Tania. Good afternoon, all. In the last session, we have learned about palliative care delivery and IDT, interdisciplinary team. Today, we will be learning about laying the foundation for good practice. The topics that we explore in today's session are aspects of good history taking, genograms and echo maps, family dynamics, and what they can tell you, caregiver versus bystander. We have our faculty, Smriti ma'am, over here. Smriti ma'am, over to you.
Thank you. And firstly, I want to apologize to everybody for being late. Life gets in the way sometimes. So I'm here to take you through the session on laying the foundation of good practice. And I'm mindful that several of you are very, very well versed with history taking and with what it means to have a good foundation in terms of assessment, which then goes on to define appropriate treatment goals and interventions. I'm going to take you through this specifically from a palliative care lens, and this is how we practice it in our setting. You might find that different organizations and different institutions have different ways of doing it. We have found this to be quite effective. So this is just, it's sort of a guided tour of how we navigate the terrain, especially from a non-medical perspective. Of course, history taking in the medical sense is a very, very systematic process in and of itself. And we have different parts of assessment and history taking, depending on who in the interdisciplinary team is doing the history taking. But why the session is called Laying the Foundation for Good Practice is because if we don't get these basic fundamental bits of information right, we're only going to be led astray in terms of the path ahead. And the interventions, the procedures, the whatever it is that we're trying to do, the outcomes will be skewed because we have not understood the very basics of what the person is experiencing. And so I'm just going to start sharing my screen and jump right in. As always, I will remind you to please use the chat box to share your comments and your questions and reflections if you have any. And I will also request that personal reflections are saved for the end of the session where we can actually take the time to respond to them more empathetically rather than rushing through it in order to keep time for the session. Senior, please let me know when the screen is visible.
Yes, ma'am, it's visible.
All right, okay. So we talked about this idea of total pain in our first session. Which is to say that physical pain reported by a patient is compounded by his or her life circumstances. And what we really need to do in order to understand what that person's total pain is also a social diagnosis and an understanding of psychological, biological, social, and environmental factors operating on the person in his situation, in her situation, in their situation, however you want to approach it. And this is as much an art and a science as so I will, it's not something that we just do ad hoc depending on who it is that is interviewing them. There is a systematic way of doing it, and I hope that by the end of the session you find these tips useful. Okay, so let's go back to the idea that you have something called a disease. And what does a disease entail? What is a disease? This is an open question for everybody. What is a disease? I'm looking at the chat box. I know it takes a little bit of time to warm up, so we're just going to give it a few. Illness, okay. So someone says illness. Anything else? A suboptimal state of being, okay? Anomaly from normal body physiological function, yes. Anything else? Okay, chat box stays open, so please go ahead. Now, like Rajesh said, abnormal condition affecting an organism requiring treatment. So it is an abnormal condition affecting an organism requiring treatment. And this includes infections, degeneration of tissue, injury, trauma, toxic exposure, all kinds of things. Okay. And an illness actually is all the emotions, the distress, the discomfort, the fatigue, the weakness, the pain that requires management. Okay, so disease is what affects the body in an organic manner, or it affects the organism. Illness is all of the attending issues that come with that disease. Okay, so there is a difference here. Although we tend to use these two phrases interchangeably, so Mona, I wouldn't worry too much about being wrong about that. You're not wrong. We use it, but if you want to really go into the weeds of it, this is the actual distinction. Okay. Disease usually causes illness. If you have a disease, you have all of these ensuing emotions and distress and discomfort associated with it. Okay. But not every person with a disease may experience illness in this way. For example, high blood pressure, early stages of cancer. Just because, see, and why do, with cancer, you find that a lot of people present late. Why do they present late? Because they only pick up on their symptoms a lot later. So in the early part of the disease, as the disease is evolving, most people are not even aware that they have the disease. So it's not necessary that from the get-go of the disease, you're going to feel this distress and discomfort. Sometimes it takes a while for it to manifest. And in some cases, if it is managed well, you don't feel all of these things. Yeah, so if you're taking your high blood pressure medication on time, if you're managing your diabetes, all of that, then it's not necessary that you feel all of these other, the illness factor of it too much. And you're able to just go through your day-to-day life fairly smoothly. But there are also some illnesses that occur without diseases, and this is what we call somatoform disorders. And there is a lot of debate around this because there are some people who are firmly on the side that these are made up conditions. They actually have no biological basis and therefore they are not real. Whereas there's a whole bunch of other people who believe that no, somatoform illnesses are something to be considered. And there is a very strong mind-body connection, and it is not always necessary that the physical disease will be absolutely visible or tangible in that sense. So, so there is a lack of understanding around this, and this is a topic of hot debate. And we do know one thing, that while disease does cause illness, or sometimes illness lies dormant, if you're feeling ill, it will impact your disease. Okay, so how is that? Why am I saying that illness impacts the disease? In what way can illness impact disease? Would anyone like to take a shot at, commenting on that? How can your illness impact your disease? If you look at illness in the sense of emotions, distress, discomfort, dysfunction, how can that impact your disease? You can unmute and speak up if you like. Depression can cause high BP, can aggravate pain, response to treatment can vary, yes. What else? Can it affect compliance with treatment? Stress and depression can slow down recovery, yeah. Depression can cause low metabolism. So let's look at this. How somebody has cancer and they've got fatigue, they've got very, they're very low affect, really low mood. How will that illness impact the cancer? How can all of that impact the cancer of the person? Low willpower can lessen desire to live. Anybody else? non-cooperation to treatment. Yeah. And fatigue will just maybe sometimes just, you don't have the energy to go to the hospital to get the treatment you need. And yeah, how many of us know when, I mean, I've recently in the last year, I'm using this as an example because it's an easy example for me to reach. I was talking to a friend whose father clearly needs physiotherapy because he's having trouble standing up, sitting down, walking by himself. But he's gone into this shell. And now that we've organized a physiotherapist for him, he's refused. So it's only going to worsen his condition. So we've dealt with that kind of stubbornness as well. I'm sure some of you have had experience with that within your own families, if not with patients that you work with. Okay. So disease then, Eric J. Kessel says this disease then is something an organ has, illness is something a man has. I will alter that to say a person has, because man, woman, anybody. Okay, so now that we've addressed that, we must address the disease and the illness. Okay, so where am I getting at with all of this? We're talking about fundamentals, but why am I going on about disease and illness? Because we have to treat the person, and the person has one component is the disease. The illness is a constellation of things that the person is facing, and you cannot separate the two because they influence one another. And if you just go for, okay, the chemotherapy, the medication for TB, and you're not addressing all of these other attending issues, then you're not really treating the person. And then going back to the definition of health, it is not just the absence of disease and infirmity, it is also the presence of well-being. So you're not focusing on the well-being if you're only focusing on the cure. Okay. Why is psychosocial care important in palliative care? And not just in palliative care, I would say healthcare in general, but particularly here because living with a life-limiting or life-threatening illness, or even the awareness that this is a terminal illness and there might be, that death is looming, causes a unique set of stressors and challenges. Okay. And if it's you're living long-term or a few months, you're living with an acute exacerbation of an episode, or you know that this is a serious advanced illness, just that awareness of it really brings with it unique sets of stressors and challenges. And therefore, that person cannot be treated on the same baseline as somebody who does not have that condition. And a serious illness will disrupt an individual's thoughts and feelings, relationships, social and spiritual supports, financial stability, and sense of spirituality. So, unlike say something that can be managed well, a serious illness is a total experience. It's a total human experience, and therefore it is important for us to examine what the psychosocial impact of that disease is, what is the illness aspect of the disease. Okay, so here's a case study, and I'm going to request somebody to please unmute and read this out for me. Somebody who hasn't spoken perhaps till now. I'm going to have to call names out. Would anyone like to just unmute and be Sinead?
Hi, I can give this a go.
Thank you.
Hi, okay. 55-year-old lady diagnosed with a diagnosis of cancer of the buccal mucosa has been referred to you after receiving radiotherapy and chemotherapy at the Regional Cancer Center from 2021 onwards. She's accompanied by her son and husband. She is in pain, emaciated, nauseated. All three people appear to be emotionally low/distressed.
Thank you very much. That's terrible. The first line has terrible grammar. Okay, so 55-year-old lady, cancer of the buccal mucosa, referred to us after receiving radiotherapy, chemotherapy at the RCC. Somebody saying something, Sinead?
No, ma'am.
Okay. She's accompanied by her husband and son. She's in pain, emaciated, nauseated. Emaciated, basically, really she's lost a lot of weight. She's nauseated all the time. And all of them are obviously emotionally low and distressed. Now, what are you going to examine about this? Now, I want you to bear that in mind. Okay? So if you're looking at this family, what is your immediate impression? What would be your immediate impression? And what, in your opinion, do you need to assess about this family that is going to put you in better stead to help them better? Okay, what part of this family are you going to examine? Or where are you going to pay attention? What do you need to know about this family in order to help them? Financial stability. What else? Support system, including the financial part. Yeah. Where would you start? Anyone? Family background or something like like genotype, genetics, state of mind of patient. Okay. What else? Where would you start? How the patient feels to start. Who is taking care of the patient? Psychological support. Family. Okay. So all of you who are generating, start assessing the total pain. Okay, fine. Great. Now I'm going to stop sharing my screen for a second so I can interact with all of you. Okay. So for all of these things that you're saying, you're going to check their psychological state, who's looking after them, what is the financial stability. Why? Why are you starting there? On the pain, I'm feeling low. Where on the spectrum are they, or where in the region? So tell me why. What is the purpose of asking the question that you're asking? To treat the suffering of the family and the patient. Let's be less generic. Let's be more specific. We want to help this family. We all know that. But by asking a question, what are you determining and why? You're trying to treat suffering and not disease. Okay, Mona, yes, but I'm going to ask you to be more specific. Why do you want to know the psychological state of this person?
Because we are more concerned about treating the suffering of the patient rather treating the main cause. Like we are trying to give emotional support, financial support, overall support, rather giving directly cancer treatment or something like that.
Okay, so
We are
here's,
focused about care rather than cure.
okay, that's great. How would you prioritize it? What would you put right on top of your priority list?
I think financial status, because of if the person is not financially stable, how will the patient continue with chemotherapy and RTs or cancer treatment? So my first concern will be financial status of the family.
Great. Okay, fine. So fantastic. That clears things up better. Just 1 second, please. Just give me a moment. Mickey, where am I? Sorry. So okay, great. I can see the chat box filling up. Because it affects further management of treatment. We're trying to treat suffering, to happen with appropriate objective assessment devoid of superficial understanding to physical appearance, file-based information. Rather than applying a standard blanket treatment, patient and family should be very clear. No same method for all patients. Okay, fine. So we all understand that we have a purpose in why we are asking particular questions. So building on that, we need to remember something that first of all, assessment is the two parts to it. One is that it is an exploration process of gathering information about the person. And secondly, the selection of goals and interventions depends largely on what is being assessed. Now, if I'm going to be looking at mitigating their financial suffering, then of course I have to assess their financial stability status, like Mona just said. Yeah. If I think that that is the biggest threat, if I think that perhaps, you know, she's come in and she's in really low affect, and somebody else here has said their psychological state, because maybe I feel that unless her psychological state is not properly understood, I'm not going to get a handle on how much she's actually suffering. She needs to be able to articulate that to me. So understand that while we're talking about objectivity, there is a subjective aspect to it, and that subjective aspect is you. What do you prioritize? And that depends on your training, that depends on what your skill set is, what your expertise is. As somebody who is trained in psychological counseling, or as a social worker, or as somebody who has the ability to, you know, put them in touch with subsidies and things, am I going to assess their medical status? No, because that's not my department. And for me, my selection of goals and interventions is going to be determined by what I'm asking. So asking the right question is really, really important, rather than sitting there and saying, okay, tell me, what has this journey been like for you? Because that is time consuming. So even in this kind of communication, it is very surgical. You have to be very clear when you enter an assessment, when you enter into this interaction or engagement with the patient and the family, go in clearly understanding what it is that you want to assess. Okay, as you talk to them, of course, things might emerge that might make you shuffle your priorities a bit. That's fine, but always go in with clear-sightedness about what it is you're going to do. This kind of, oh, I'm just going to let them vent and tell me all. I mean, there is a place for it, but not when you are specifically going to assess something in order to be able to come up with very clear outcomes for the family. An inaccurate or incomplete assessment will lead to inappropriate goals and interventions. There's no two ways about it. Absolutely no two ways about it. And if you're going to, and yes, I understand that it's not always possible to get a complete picture at one shot. It's not. But then that's where our training kicks in, and we start to, after a while, identify what the silence is or what the gaps also telling us. Okay. But be mindful that if some bits of information are missing, then that's what you're building your next interaction upon. Okay. And the aim of assessment is to identify factors and interventions that may influence the well-being of patients and families. I think this group understands that very well, given all your responses in the chat box and the fact that we are looking to decrease their suffering overall and not just looking to treat the disease. Okay. And I like what Karthik said about patients and the family should have clear view on what is going on and how things will proceed. That is not, unfortunately, that is not always the case, is it? A lot of the times families are working in the dark because they have incomplete information themselves. So this becomes what even assessment, you're actually entering into a partnership with the patient and the family, because as much as they're telling you, there is much information that you are here to give them as well. So it is an equal partnership. There is this beautiful, quote by this Buddhist nun called Pema Chodron. She says, compassion is not a relationship between the healer and the wounded. It is a relationship between equals. And so always entering into this space, looking at the other person as your equal. They are here to give you as much information as you are here to help them and give them information that they need. Now, who are the sources of information? Patient and caregiver. There are collateral sources, friends, relatives, neighbors, and home visits. Now, not all of these are always possible. I want to be very clear about it, but these are all the possible sources of information that you have at your disposal. For those of you who work in the community, friends, relatives, and neighbors are far more accessible. For those of you who work in inpatient units, that's not always possible, but then you have people visiting that you can help piece the puzzle together with. And for those of us who do home visits, the home itself can tell us a lot of what we need to know about the person that we're working with. Okay. Assessment is not something that's a one-time thing. Okay. It is an ongoing process. And as the disease progresses, the illness, the face of the illness changes. Sometimes when the disease is under control and there haven't been too many setbacks in terms of the disease, the patient might then emotionally stabilize a little bit. They'll start prioritizing other stuff. They might start getting more energetic, etc. They might re-engage with life. And then you have a setback or you have a break point, and suddenly there's mobility issues, or a report has come back and the report is not as positive as we imagined or expected or hoped for. And so then, of course, the illness in terms of, how we're coping with the disease changes. So at each of these points, we are constantly assessing. Every conversation in itself is a mini assessment. Okay, so please understand that this is not something that we're just documenting once and saying, okay, this is the status and this is it. Every meeting of yours, every conversation of yours in and of itself is an assessment. And your observations have to be purposeful. And so do your conversations. They cannot be random. Oh, let me just see, what can I ask this person now? Okay, I better ask about the children. And something that you're coming up with on the spot. Yes, there is room for spontaneity, but like I said, please go in with a clear-cut understanding of what do I need to know about this person. Let's look at that lady who, 55-year-old woman with buccal mucosa. Does this lady understand what that diagnosis means? So maybe my first assessment, and this is just an example, my first assessment interaction with her is to go and sit with her and really understand what she knows about her illness. What is this buccal mucosa? What does it mean to you? Why is, and then maybe, that's going to be my goal for just that one session. And because unless I have an understanding of what this person thinks she has, then I'm not going to be able to go much further. What does this disease mean to her? What does this illness mean to her? Okay. So my every sentence, every question in that particular interaction will be geared towards that. How do I gauge her understanding of her own disease and illness? Okay. And my conversations are also going to go towards that. I'm going to listen carefully to what she says. I'm going to ask the right questions that will give me the information that I need. So there is purpose in every bit of interaction that I have with her. What do you do when the patient is not made fully aware of a disease? So Lakshana, we will talk about that in more detail later. And yes, that's collusion. What you're talking about is collusion. Collusion is when the family conspires with the healthcare professionals to not tell the patient what their disease diagnosis is. And it's one of the biggest challenges we face because a lot of the times the patient does know that they're not well and they've pieced together things. And so there is this massive there is this tension in the air because they know something is being kept from them. The family is constantly coming to the healthcare workers and saying, please don't say, please don't say, please don't say. So what do you do then? There is a process for that. We will discuss that in a communications class. So if you can just hold that thought, or maybe when we have time at the end of the session, we will address that in more detail. Is that okay, Lakshana? Okay. All right.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. Thank you.
Thanks for that. Okay. Now, what are the important areas to be aware from the point of view of total pain? There are several, as we talked about. We talked about the physical, the distress that they're feeling physically, socioeconomic factors, spiritual factors, psychological, emotional, and social factors. Yeah. Now, this slide is a little bit misplaced. I'm sorry. I'm just going to come back to it. Okay. So, firstly, in terms of assessment, this is typically the format that we follow in Pallium India. So I'm just going to share this with you. Okay. We look at the patient and family overview. I will tell you what that means in a minute. Insight about the diagnosis and prognosis. How much do they know? How much do they understand? What is the structure of the family? What are the dynamics within the family? What is the socioeconomic condition? What are the psychological states that each person, caregiver and patient are in? Psychosexual issues, spiritual distress, and interventions and plans. Okay, so this is a very broad stroke, back of the envelope sort of format that we follow. Please understand this is not necessarily in this order. I mean, ideally you get the patient family overview and the first three points you should be able to try and capture as early as possible. But after that, all of this will emerge depending on what you prioritize from your observations. And maybe, unfortunately for us in palliative care, sometimes, especially when we're dealing with people who are in end-stage disease or who are at the end of life, we don't even have the time to really gather all this information that we need. So we just, we focus on what is absolutely essential at that moment And very often the focus becomes about the caregiver and bereavement and so on. But so like I said, you will shift and oscillate between these depending on the occasion, depending on the last crisis, depending on what the patient is prioritizing or the family is prioritizing. So it's not necessarily a hard and fast rule that you will go through all of these one after the other. Okay, so when you come to patient and family overview, basic demographic details are important, of course, and you know, who's in the family, age, this, that, etc. And occupation before and after the illness. Why is it important to know the occupation before and after the illness? Why are we asking what is the occupation?
Since we should know, like once the person is cured or is in a better condition, how will be treating himself or herself?
Can you elaborate on that a little bit, Sheeta?
For example, if the patient is a teacher
Hmm.
and she has got to go back to her duty of teaching or being on time, getting up early, that entire kind of a life cycle or the daily routine, we will know once we know what is the occupation. If it's a software engineer and they have to do a late nights, then we will know their kind of work cycle. So we will know how this person will respond after taking the care from the palliative side, like, you know, whatever it is. So what will be the after, before, or what would have led to this condition, or what is that person's thinking? Because each occupation or each segment of area of service will give a certain kind of input to us to think through or to chew on, just thinking through.
Great.
Thank
So
you.
the way you're looking at it, and it's an interesting lens that you've got on it, which is it tells you a lot about the person, because their occupation tells you a lot about their lifestyle, tells you a lot about their perhaps their stressors and challenges, etc. And also it serves as a baseline to see, okay, you know, what's it going to look like after they get better. And I'm looking at the chat box now, which is just full of very interesting responses. Finances in a sense of purpose. Yeah, I mean, we're all tied to what we do. And also it determines our economic status. Like we depending on what the person was doing, how much were they earning? Were they the breadwinner? And suddenly now this, you know, they've stopped working, and what's happened to their finances? It gives us a great indication of their financial health. Whether they can afford treatment. Yes, Mona. Likely the patient's not able to continue the same occupation after the diagnosis. Yes. And what does that, you know, leave you feeling? I mean, if someone was really passionate about their work, or whether it was really hard work that they were doing, what does it mean now that they can't continue to do it? How do they define their sense of self, pre and post diagnosis? Treatment might have hindered normal working, capacity to handle occupational intricacies, nature, degree of occupational hazards, to know if it's impaired one's life. Yep. That little bit of information can give you so much more information. Okay. And who is the primary caregiver and what is their relationship? Why do I want to know this? Why do I want to know who is the primary caregiver and what is the nature of the relationship?
The role of a caregiver is very important. And for example, if it's a housewife, then we know that that person can give more dedicated hours as compared to a working spouse. Or probably that person does not have anyone at home to be the caregiver. So then you can shift him or her to the hospital or have another center allocated, or you can give the care at home if there's a caregiver. Maybe the age of the caregiver also, the gender also. It could be a lot of factors that can be thought through. Thank you.
Excellent, excellent. To know if it's impaired ones, I have to. Oh my God, I haven't read Tamil in a long time. Advise. What would suit them after the disease? Thanks, Karthik, for making me go back to my childhood trauma of failing Tamil for 8 years in school. Who will look after the patient, because he will be taking most of the decisions for the patient. Okay, you've written it in English as well. That's great. Okay, and is that a family member, some attendant? No, that's it. Education inside caregiver affects the whole process. Yeah. So we all agree this is important information. Who is the caregiver? Do they have a caregiver? What kind of caregiving is it? And it tells us a lot about the dynamics in the family as well. The second thing we're looking at is insight of diagnosis, prognosis, and palliative care. insight that both the patient and the family have. Now, when we start doing case presentations with all of you, or when you start doing case presentations with us, you will have a slide where you have to mention what is the insight that the patient and the family have about the diagnosis, the prognosis, and palliative care. Okay. Why? Okay, let's take diagnosis. What is the insight that the patient has about the diagnosis? Why do I need to know that?
Maybe to check how much of awareness that person himself or herself has about what he's undergoing or what they're going through and what they can expect out of it. Maybe they can make themselves mentally prepared, or financially also, like they can adjust their sales or ask for help or whatever. Like there could be a lot of things that could go into it. Thank you.
Thank you. Specifically diagnosis. What you've also talked about now is prognosis. Okay, so why diagnosis? Why diagnosis? To guide the way we communicate with them. Yes, Nancy, absolutely. To know what is coming, to know what, if the patient knows what type of disease, outcome and course of different patient diagnosis. Yeah, it will really guide me if I know how much the patient knows. Also, insight is very different from knowledge. Take this 55-year-old lady. I have buccal mucosa. What does that mean? How many people in this group know, apart from the doctors, I'm not asking you, how many people here know what buccal mucosa is? Cancer of the buccal mucosa. Yeah, go ahead, Lakshana, guess. Cheek lining, yeah. Mouth, wound, yeah, mouth, yeah. It's a kind of head and neck cancer. Okay. Now imagine at least, okay, that is visible, right? If you look at it, head and neck cancers are quite visible. And so it's literally looking you in the face. Suppose I have a diagnosis, and I'm going to go back to this. I've used this as an example. The diagnosis is idiopathic interstitial lung disease. I know my diagnosis. What does that mean? Do I know what it means? My diagnosis is MS, multiple sclerosis. I know my diagnosis. So as a clinician, what are you going to ask? Do you know what you have? I have multiple sclerosis. Patient knows about diagnosis. Does the patient really know about the diagnosis? You have to ask. What does that mean to you? Okay, that's insight. Knowledge and insight are two different things. Prognosis, insight on prognosis. What are some of the likely scenarios you're going to experience? Life expectancy. What is prognosis? Is it only life expectancy? Is it only probability of cure? What else does prognosis have?
Maybe the conditions that I expected, the changes that could happen to you.
Yeah, like what? How this disease going to move in usual circumstances?
I don't know about the disease that you mentioned, but probably if we're taking about something like a mouth cancer, which you get after chewing tobacco and whatever that is, then you can expect what, like, how will your face look like? Will there be any kind of, like, not so pleasant things or whatever? Like, if it's that thing that can be there, like, they should be able to accept themselves or their condition.
But what's the usual status in India? Let me ask you. Serious condition has been diagnosed. Okay, somebody has been diagnosed with cancer. And what is the patient always told? What is the patient always told?
Sab theek ho jayega. It'd be all right.
Okay. So I have to work with that. Now, the insight that the caregiver and the patient and the family has might be very different. Yes, we know it's a serious illness, and there might be conflict within the family. Some people are saying, okay, this is a serious terminal illness, and there's somebody who's saying, no, we will not give up. We will take this person wherever we have to take them, whether it's to America or to, to some other place where there is someone who will do homeopathy or Ayurveda, whatever. So there's all kinds of things. So it's really important for us to know the insight on prognosis also, because it tells us how to communicate with the patient. It's going to show you where the communication blocks are in the family. It's going to tell you level of understanding. It's going to tell you how much the medical system has explained to them. And why, if they have unrealistic hopes, why? Because of what are the gaps that they have in the information. So these are very, very, very small things, seemingly on paper, but they can tell you a lot. There is no curative treatment further, so the disease will spread in the body. How disease will turn out to be, it's something like a prediction. See, I would say prediction, be careful to use that word prediction, because it's
It's something on the basis of medical knowledge, or when some doctor knows कि if you don't take treatment, your disease will turn out to be more aggressive or something. It's not right to say prediction, but it's about on the basis of medical knowledge, medical experience.
So the word you're looking for is prognostication. Okay. It's
Yeah.
prognostication. Yeah. So the reason I'm saying be cautious about using prediction is because people will really hang their hat on that and say, but you said this is going to happen. So be very careful about that word prediction. Yeah. Prognostication is what doctors do. And Dr. Roop Bursahani will talk to you about prognostication when we do an end of life care session, because that becomes really important, prognostication. And a good doctor should be able to prognosticate depending on the current symptoms and trajectory that they are seeing. All right, so coming back to the presentation, the mindful time. Okay, family structure and dynamics. And somebody mentioned, so I'm going to talk about genogram and family dynamics and history of illness in the family. So why do I need to know the family structure and dynamics? Why do I need to know the family structure and dynamics? How is it going to help me as a clinician to help the family better? It's not just about the caregiver. And why do I need to know the dynamics of the family? Why do I need to know the dynamics of the family? How is it going to help me?
Maybe to check on what is going to be the after the support system, or the kind of an attitude that they would be having towards the patient. Maybe if the patient is very old, or if the patient is very young, or if the patient is the bread earner, or if he's like, there'll be a lot of factors that will be going into knowing how the family is actually bound together or not bound together at all.
What are you going to do with
It's
this
a-
information?
Pardon?
What are you going to do with this information?
Possibility of a home treatment or a hospitalization, or meaning you can suggest to them what would be the, and if there is any kind of an additional therapy that is to be required, or if there is some kind of somebody has got some kind of an attitude, maybe they talk loudly, maybe they have got maybe uh, depending what kind of a parenting, grooming, or whatever has gone into that system. So that will talk a lot on what to expect again future. I mean, so sorry, I'm just going back in the same cycle. What to expect in the future, and who, how, and probably whichever angles we were told yesterday in the last session, there are various teams who work on this. So whom to seek help, what to plan, whose role will be what, whether they need some kind of like a social work angle, whether they need a kind of a therapeutic angle, which therapy exactly. Is there any kind of an additional thing that is expected, like probably somebody's having say sugar problem, so probably that will, maybe it will come into the family, meaning you should know about these things about the family. That will be helping you to do a lot of whatever that word you use, prognosticism, whatever. Yeah. So probably that. Yeah.
More from a medical point of view, to see the trajectory of the disease itself. Now, what this also, I'm seeing a lot of really good responses in the chat box as well. And thank you, Sheetal. I think you've covered most of it. And yes, it helps us plan goals of care. So it helps us understand goals of care. It helps us plan certain interventions. You remember that picture I showed you of that boy using the parallel bars at home in the first session? Yeah. He was told very clearly to get physiotherapy once a week. Had the doctor done this sort of assessment, he would have known that it's not possible. Right? It's really simple. He would have known that once a week physiotherapy is not possible. Maybe he could have done something else. Okay. And that's why family dynamics and structure is important. And we all, I mean, let's not fool ourselves to believe that every family is cohesive. That when somebody is sick, the whole family will rally around them. No, dysfunction in a family will only be amplified and enhanced in a crisis situation. And illness is a crisis situation. This is the rule of thumb. Unless there is a very, very strong external intervention at that point. Those of you who are psychologists here, you know this, a crisis will enhance an existing dysfunction. Okay, so I need to know that. Now here is, and what is the easiest way for me? Now, what I want to know about the family, the structure, the dynamics is that it's a big Ram Katha. How much time do I have? How am I going to get all these family dynamics out? You have a very, very, very useful tool in your toolbox, okay? And that is the genogram. And this is the thing about the genogram. A lot of people dismiss it because they think it's like such a basic tool. The beauty and the elegance of this tool is its simplicity. And I'm going to strongly encourage all of you to start using genograms more and more in your practice. As Indians, we are taught to write long paragraphs because that's how we get the marks in the examinations. I would say it's a complete waste of time. It's a complete waste of energy. You're going to lose out on time. You're going to lose out on details. Learn how to do the genogram, and that same information can be recorded in a snapshot. And that is a snapshot if your entire team is trained the same way. Anybody looking at that genogram knows how to read it and can keep adding to it. Okay, so you don't have to write another 10 pages. To me, I find it extremely cumbersome to read Mr. So-and-so, his wife's name is so-and-so, he has a 13-year-old son and a 2-year-old daughter. No, nobody has the time to read through 15 pages of that. Look at a genogram and you know in a shot what's happening now. So genograms are important because one, they tell you structure, okay? And so it was created by Murray Bowen, and it's a graphical representation of a person's family over at least 3 generations. Please remember, it's not the nuclear family alone. Even though it's the nuclear family that you're dealing with, you have to put in 3 generations. And it tells us structure, dynamics, strengths, and resources. That's what a good genogram is going to tell you. And the types of information that you put in it are name, age, education and occupational profile, and emotional relationships. So here's how we're going to do it. For those of you who are very, very familiar with genograms, I'm sorry if this is it's a repetition, but I always find it to be a great revision for myself as well. So typically these are the symbols we use: square for male, circle for female. One strong line indicates married, one line across indicates separated, 2 lines means divorce. Now, if you go online, you'll find all these different symbols, yeah? And depending on what kind of assessment you're doing, like in some cases, the signs that people in maternal and child health, you're looking for things like this, whether it's stillbirth, miscarriage, foster child, pregnancy, etc. In palliative care, you're looking for different indicators. So you don't necessarily need to go into these details unless it's absolutely necessary. So depending on your focus, get online, check out the genogram. There's enough information about genogram symbols, and use one that is best suited to your context. And please make sure that everybody in your team has been oriented to it and everybody's using it the same way. There's no point one of you using one genogram style and somebody else using another genogram style and nobody knows what's going on. Okay. Now, typically, you do the structure, but then you can denote emotional relationships. Okay. It's a regular relationship. There's no big ups and downs. These two are very close in terms of a friendship. These are very close. It's an intimate relationship. There is hostility or there's violence. There's emotional abuse, sexual abuse, neglect, which is also a form of abuse. So all of these things can be denoted. You can use different colors, and you can use color pencil so that if a relationship changes, you can rub it out and change it to what it is currently. Now, why am I going to? Is this genogram developed over multiple meetings? Because some of these things may not be spoken of. Yeah. Your genogram, Lakshana, you're going to be developing for the duration of your relationship with this person. Every time you go and meet this person, you're going to find out something new and you're going to add it to the genogram. Okay. So it's part of the assessment and it is an ongoing process. Now, why am I focusing on emotional relationships? Now, can someone volunteer to tell me about this family? The cross, just to let you know, the X is deceased. Okay?
Deceased.
Can I try?
Please go ahead.
See, I guess it's the main client is Sindhu, 40 years of age. It's a lady, female, and probably she's had 2 marriages. One was a Raju the Kuli, and the other one is a Mason, Shahji. And they are blessed with, from the previous marriage, she is blessed with Saran, a boy, 16-year-old. And from the current marriage, she has got twins, 13 years old, Amal and Vimal, studying in 8th class and 11th class. Going back to the Sindhu's side and Shahji's side, you are having another graph put over there. Both father and mother of Shahji are no more, whereas in Sindhu's family, Leela, mother is 60 years old and Mohan has passed away. That's the father. Leela is a homemaker. That's it, just.
Thank you. Thanks, Sheetal.
Welcome.
Now, what is this not telling me?
The part which you just mentioned before this slide, what is the kind of dynamics between them, between the connections, how they are to each other?
Okay.
Emotional relationship. Thanks, Mona.
Okay, so I'm working in a bit of a vacuum here, aren't I? I know the structure. Who's talking to whom, who's not talking to whom, who plays what role in whose life? No clue.
The closeness of the family members, who is far off, who is not in good terms, is there any kind of a conflict? Has there been any kind of an abuse? All those factors will have a major role to play in Sindhu's life to know her better.
Yeah.
And to know who will support, who will not support, and all those things.
Thank you. Thanks, Sheetal. Sinead has talked about not knowing Sindhu's occupation. Okay, now I'm going to move to the next slide. And I'd request somebody else to now tell me about the same family. Try and read this out. Would anyone else like to give it a go?
I'd like to give it a
Okay.
go if that's possible.
Yes, of course, please. I can't see this.
Lakshana, hi again.
Archana, go
Okay,
on.
so I'm just going to take off from where Sheetal left off. We have multiple people who've come into this. The current partner, Shahji, seems to have a sibling called Subhash, who's married to Veena. And I'm assuming that the red zigzag line indicates that there is conflict between Subhash, Veena, and Shahji.
Yeah.
There also seems to be conflict between Shahji and Sindhu's first child from her first partnership, Sharath. There seems to be a conflict there. On the other hand, there seems to be a healthy relationship between Sindhu and her sibling, Indu, who's married to Mani, and also a healthy relationship between Sindhu and her sister, Bindu, who is married to Ravi, who's a driver. And I don't know what those broken lines are between Vimal and Sharath.
That's a friendly relationship.
Okay, friendly relationship then, yes.
So that's great, Lakshana. Thanks, spot on. Now, why is this important to me? Sindhu is a patient. She's the patient who's come to me. Okay. Now looking at this diagram, And also the circle tells me who lives with whom, by the way. No? People who live together are put into one circle together. So now I know Shaji, Sindhu, and the 3 children live together. Shaji does not, there's conflict with Sharat. And he's very, and he's got a strong relationship with his own sons. And the twins are close to Sharat.
Also, the previous chart did not have a siblings in the picture. Now we have got the siblings and the in-laws as well, because in-laws play a big role, big dynamics in the life, at least of the girl. I don't know about the boy.
For sure. So now you know. So what did I said that how family conflict is likely to affect treatment and the caregiving support system. Exactly. So now that you know this, you know who you can call in for respite care. You know what sort of issues are going to come up, are likely to come up at home. Who does, so Shaji has absolutely he's not going to get any support from his own side of the family. And as we go along, we're going to just keep on building on this. So it gives me a lot more to work with. And now the same thing, this diagram, if you were to write down in narrative form, would take you about 5 pages. Now, every time you go back to meet the family and you find out something new, you can add it here. So much easier. Okay. Anyway, moving on from this. Now, the relationships, current status of important relationships is also part of psychosocial assessment. Are they supportive, estranged, isolated? Because relationships are also altered by illness. Relationships do get altered by illness. Okay. And there's a quote by Jacqueline Johnson. I'm going to skip it for now. Okay. Now I'm going to introduce you to something called, okay, how are the resources mapped? Lakshana, resources in the sense of emotional resource, okay, not so much the money part, but then occupation will also tell you who is in a position to help and if there's a strong relationship there. And so, yeah, okay, good. Okay. Now, how many of you here are aware of this thing called EcoMap? How many people, can I just see a show of hands? You can use the you can use the emoji reaction button or whatever it's called. How many people here know EcoMap?
And there was one more observation in the previous chart. Shaji doesn't get along with his own brother or sister-in-law, and he doesn't get along with anyone. So probably he's not a very good supporter for Sindhu to take care, probably, if that's a caretaker.
That's a point that we need to investigate. So it gives us something to investigate rather than assume. Yeah. So, Senior, I'm not seeing all the screens. So nobody knows about the EcoMap.
Yes, I think so.
All right, great.
There are no thumbs up.
So just like, okay, yeah, well, I'm hoping that this will be useful to you. So like the genogram tells you about the dynamics and structure of the family. The EcoMap tells you where the family sits in a larger social setting. Okay. And that is also very important because as palliative care providers working in community settings, this is something that's very important for us to know. So the EcoMap is something developed by Anne Hartman. It's a pictorial representation of patient family in its social environment and its relationship with the larger society. It's a snapshot view of important interactions of the patient's family with other systems and groups, extended family, individuals, organizations, associations, etc. It tells me how strong the family is in terms of getting support socially, or how isolated the family. Sometimes some diseases are stigmatizing. It might isolate the family further. It might exacerbate the problem. So what does an EcoMap look like? Typically, it looks like this. So who are the systems that you're going to talk about? Anybody that they interact with. It could be the school that the children go to, the health service, that is including the palliative care team, extended family, not the ones that are in the genogram, but beyond those, friends, neighbors, workplace of anybody who's working in the family, local services like the panchayat, clubs that they might be part of. It's an important part of their lives. Religious institutions, if they are part of a congregation or part of a group that gets together for religious events, and also religious institutions. Okay, so now how does this translate? And it's not that you have to go through all of these. It's really who the person is. I may not be part of a religious institution, so I don't need that bubble to be brought in. But so there are two ways to do this. One is the family itself, okay? So I'm going to try and go slowly through this. You've drawn the genogram in the middle. You don't have to draw a very detailed genogram here. You've already got a genogram set on the side. So this is just a hypothetical situation. But just like you have emotional dynamics within the genogram, you can also show the strength of the relationship in the eco map. Now, for example, here, and you can show it for the family as a whole and for individuals within the family. Now, here's the patient. This is not the same patient as the last. Okay, here's the husband. Husband has a strong relationship with his work colleagues. That's where he seeks respite. The wife, self-help group gives her a lot of support. See, the arrow will tell you the energy flow. So in the case of the colleagues, it's a two-way flow. He's very close to it's a reciprocal relationship with his colleagues, okay? He's close to his colleagues. Here, the self-help group that the woman is part of really gives her a lot of support. The family as a whole has a strong relationship with the church, okay? Panchayat member has like a very weak relationship with the family. He's a bit tepid, okay? Neighbors are hostile towards the family. There is a volunteer who goes and provides support to the family as a whole. This younger daughter gets a lot of support from school, and both she and her brother have great relationships with their friends, and especially the son with the college friends and the daughter with the youth organization. The public health center, very weak relationship with the wife. Okay, so I'm going to let you look at this diagram for a little while. All right. Any thoughts? Very quickly, we're going to spend 2 minutes here. Let me just get some thoughts from all of you and then we'll move on. Is this a useful thing? Is it useful?
Very useful.
Yeah. All right.
So basically, it will give you a kind of the support system that can be expected beyond the family. Who are the people who will be supporting in all terms, whether it is to be there as a person, whether it is in terms of financials, because like the husband seems to be having good relations with the colleagues, probably they can pitch in financially, or maybe not, but there will be like, supposing if he's not there for the office work, or sometimes somebody can fill in for him or be there. And also the other, like, probably she's not that much well versed with the government policies or any kind of those which are that public health center. She's not aware of the things that she could gain as a kind of like, plus points. And it gives an insight into the way the spirituality is there, like you mentioned, they are well connected with the church and all that. So all those help points can be gathered in for our patient.
Thanks, Sheetal. Also, it also gives us an idea of where work needs to be done. Yeah. Would an eco map be of any aid?
Something like the neighbors not being in good term, and because the neighbors are the first people who can be there at a distance to help. So maybe building some awareness, getting them to know about the patient's state condition. I don't know if it works.
Sure. Thanks, Sheetal. I'm looking at Rajesh's question here. Would an eco map be of any aid to a patient diagnosed with the need for palliative care while serving a life sentence in a prison? Wow, you didn't decide to ask me an easy question today, did you? Of course it would. I think it would. I'm glad you brought up the idea of patients in prison, because they are a very marginalized group. Now, let me put this question back to you and to the group. Can an eco map help a patient who is in prison? Who is in the ecosystem of the prisoner? The wardens, the other prisoners, the lawyer, the legal system, prisons do have enrichment programs. Yeah, it is a social system. So there are healthcare providers who are asked to go into prisons. There are certain groups of humanitarian aid workers who are allowed to go into prisons. There are teachers. There are all kinds of people who work with prisoners in today's system, right? In Kerala, we have this beautiful system in the Trivandrum prison where they started. It's called who's here from Trivandrum? Senior, is it called Jail Chapati or something? They started a catering service.
Yes, yes.
And yeah, and what they do is they started this whole system where the prisoners get to make chapatis, and during COVID, especially, they made masks and things like that. And actually, some of the prisoners end up making enough money in turn inside prison to support their families financially. When they were the breadwinners who've been in prison for whatever reason. So yes, it would help know the eco map of somebody who's in prison. Rajesh, would anything else you want to know or you want to talk about, or have we covered what your question was? Within the Indian prison system, it is similar to need for local governance in other parts of the country, especially northern India. The Kerala model is usually an outlier, but you are right. Thank you. Yeah. So you see, everyone's ecosystem will be different. The Kerala one is something that I'm talking about because it's, yeah, like you said, it's an outlier. But whether good or bad, the ecosystem exists. Yeah. So then it is up to us as healthcare providers to say, hey, this is where the slack is coming. This is where we need to work on this. So the prison itself becomes the eco map. Yeah, you're right. Okay, so the eco map, I hope you will use this tool. You can develop the technique and it will tell you not just where the strengths are, it will tell you where the gaps are. Now, that panchayat guy, I need to go talk to him because this family is probably impoverished. They have, they probably need repairs in their home. They probably have other issues depending on, you know, whatever palliative care needs they have. And it's the local self-governance body that can really come in to help in a place that I cannot. And we've utilized this in many places in Kerala where we have spoken with the panchayat and the panchayat has organized for a borewell to be dug or for some food, water, shelter provisions to be made. And this is where the eco map becomes really a powerful ally for you. Because not only are you finding resources for your patient, you are also decentralizing the amount of burden that's on you. You cannot go and take care of everything. But here, if you know that there are self-help groups in the area, part of that work can be done by them. So this is where the eco map is really it's really valuable in leveraging the kind of support systems that maybe are within reach but are not accessible to the family that you're taking care of. And this is, like we said in our first session, palliative care is the mitigation of all suffering. Yeah. Now, if the family has a decent relationship with the school, then perhaps the teachers can be spoken to be a little lenient with the children or to pay a little bit more attention to the children because there is so much tension at home or whatever it might be. Yeah. Okay. So coming back to the slides. Let's just talk about the caregiver very quickly. We need to pay attention to the caregiver. Please assess the caregiver. Now, this is a beautiful quote by Rosalind Carter, which says there are only 4 kinds of people in the world: those who have been caregivers, those who are currently caregivers, those who will be caregivers, and those who will need caregiving. So we need to really pay attention to this. And the respect for these individuals is really, really, really important to acknowledge their complex role and never ever dehumanize them by calling them bystanders. I think I've mentioned this. I particularly despise that word because a bystander means someone who stands by and watches, whereas a caregiver is the opposite of that. They're in the trenches, they're doing all the hard work and heavy lifting. Please, in your practice, I would say a person requests from me, stop using the word bystander. Start using the person's name, ideally, or the caregiver or the attendant, okay? Because bystander is a very, very dehumanizing word in my opinion. Just because it's been used for decades and centuries doesn't make it a decent word to use. Okay, so we need to pay attention to the caregiver. And now, socioeconomic conditions. The next part that we're going to examine. Do they have adequate food, water, shelter, okay, clothing? Who is the breadwinner? And who controls the finances? What is their source of income? Do they have any prior debts? Do they have any social support or government schemes or local financial support? How is the education of their children being funded? Has that come to a halt? Has that been affected by the illness? And you can see how this is very closely tied into the eco map, okay? Because the eco map is also telling you where you can look for these resources. I want to just spend 1 minute on one particular point, which is the breadwinner and the finances. Who is in caregiving, in the caregiving circle or in the genogram? Who is in your opinion, the decision maker? Is the primary caregiver the decision maker? In your experience, what has been your experience? Not always. Not always. Okay. Sometimes patients him or herself. Not usually. Simple rule of thumb, the person who controls the finances makes the decisions. Okay. That person could be the primary caregiver, or the person could be the cousin living in Dubai who's sending money to fund the treatment. And please know who is the source of income, okay? Because you can have 10,000 conversations with the primary caregiver who's at the bedside of the patient day in, day out. The person who is financing will ultimately have a say on where the money is going. Please find out who that person is, because they are the implicit, if not the explicit, decision maker. Yes, they might do it in tandem with the primary caregiver or whatever else, but very, very often the course of the treatment is determined by this person's ability to pay or not pay, or refusal or willingness. Okay, so always zero in on who is controlling the finances. That will tell you a lot about the dynamics in the family. Okay. Okay. Psychological, you have to assess for distress, emotion, support needs, anticipatory grief, and coping mechanisms. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this right now because we're going to do a whole session on psychological and mental health in palliative care. So we are not going to spend too much time here at the moment. Spiritual assessment, what we're really assessing for is connection, strengths and comfort, hope and concerns. And I want you to please bear in mind through this that religion and religious beliefs are a part of this, but they are not the only part of it. For some people, it's their God and their faith. For some people, it is how they find connection, strength and comfort, hope and concerns through other means. For some of you, it might be music. For some of you, it might be going out hiking. For some of you, it might be your friends. For some of you, it might be spending time with a pet. Okay. And that is your spiritual assessment. What is important to this person in terms of how they connect with the world around them, where they find meaning, where do they get their strength from, where do they get, what are their hopes, what are their concerns at the moment. And this is a very, there is a beautiful scale. It's the Oxford Spiritual Assessment Tool. I'll try and find a picture of it and share it with you, or I'll share it with you later. But that really gives you guiding questions on what you can ask, and you can weave into it conversation style and really get a sense of what the person's spiritual landscape looks like. And I find that tool to be particularly useful because in disease, what often happens is that you tend to focus on the negative. You focus on the deficits, you focus on the challenges. The spiritual assessment tool actually helps you reframe and redirect the person back to the positives, in a sense. What gives you strength at this point? What has given you comfort? Tell me about a time when you were able to really achieve excellence for yourself. Things like that, which really helps the person reconnect with their personhood and not focus so much on the detrimental aspects of the adverse aspects of the disease. Psychosocial sexual assessment, very tough. And why is it tough? Why is it tough?
Nobody will speak up.
Taboo in our country.
Nobody will speak about it. It's a taboo word. And they won't be comfortable sharing at times.
So in India, we don't talk about sex and we don't talk about death. So by that logic, we're a country of 1.4 billion immaculately conceived immortals, because if we talk about it, we're apparently invited. But these are the two things that are also constant in that sense. And the absence of a sexually intimate relationship, or whatever it might be, the impact on an intimate relationship. Yes, it's very difficult to talk about. And one of the big reasons is that we're not trained to talk about it. We don't know how to start, where to begin. There are lots of cultural barriers. A man can't go and ask a woman about her sexual intimacy issues. A younger person cannot go and ask an older person about it. A young social worker going and asking a 40-year-old couple about their sexual intimacy and how it's been impacted by the disease is very difficult. Yeah. So who gets to make this? I mean, I think Rajesh, you had a question with Sangamitra as well. Who in the IDT is going to be the ideal person for this? And you have to pivot. You have to pivot. You have to take into consideration the sensibilities of the patient when it comes to psychosexual issues. Okay. And very often, like you said, they don't want to talk about it. They don't want to admit that there's been a problem. But there are ways to address it. And I would say that especially in intimate couples, it is such a huge part of their lives that they have to have the ability to be able to talk about it safely. Otherwise, it will feed back and create conflict within the family. Okay. How does it apply to someone who's celibate? It doesn't. There's a, so, if it's not something that is, it is not applicable, isn't it? Or are there other deductions from the state of celibacy? I think I'll need to have a whole session just to answer Rajesh's questions, because these are not questions I can answer in 30 seconds. I would say it would not be a priority for sure, compared to some of the other issues. But I don't know, because it also really depends on, see, I've also experienced cases where somebody who has been celibate because of faith or whatever else at a time of vulnerability and illness has expressed that they may have missed having an intimate partner in their lives at this point in time. It's an individual case-to-case thing. Not everybody is going to express it as a concern, but I've had that expressed to me. And then I've had to work with the psychological impact of that. That a choice that they made earlier in life. I mean, so see, also remember that illness is a time which tests the faith of a lot of people. I've lived a good life. I've prayed. Why is my God testing me now with so much suffering? And some people go through a crisis of faith. Let's not forget that. Yeah. So it's not a template. The answer I'm giving you is not of one size fits all. It really depends on the person in front of you. And if that is something that is emerging as a regret, or it's emerging as feeling like they've missed out, then you have to address it. Yeah. And who's going to address it? Then again, we need to figure out who that's going to be. I hope that's okay if I leave it there for now. Okay, all right. Okay, thanks for those interesting questions. Okay. All right. And finally, interventions. Based on all of these things that you have gathered, now you got to decide with every session, how are you going to intervene? How are you going to help? Sometimes they just need information. Sometimes they've just not been given, it could be information about, hey, did you know that there is a pension for caregivers? It could be information that, hey, there's a primary health center here where they have some training in palliative care. It could be information that is related to the disease. It could be information that is related to support, other support systems. Liaison. How do we connect them last mile to the people they need? How do we get the panchayat to come and take care of certain things in the house that we can't take care of? How do we connect them with self-help groups or doctors who can still assist them? Regular follow-up. Sometimes what people really need is for us to walk with them all the time, because we may not be able to cure them, but we can walk with them. And there's this beautiful quote by Ram Dass. It says, we're all just walking each other home. And that is something that all of us at Pallium have talked about quite a bit. So walking with somebody requires regular follow-ups. Bereavement support for caregivers after the patient has passed on. And we're going to do an entire session on bereavement. It is a really important aspect of palliative care and providing holistic care. Rehabilitation, whether it's vocational rehabilitation or rehabilitation in terms of physical rehabilitation. Facilitation, how do we facilitate care for them? How do we facilitate with the school? How do we facilitate, educational support? How do we facilitate getting a woman in touch with, say, a women's self-help group? Yeah, supportive counseling that comes from our own team. And of course, this is only from a pure psychosocial point of view. So of course, there's the medical interventions and procedures and things like that we also do. So to summarize, assessment is the essence or a working hypothesis. Okay, it's a working hypothesis. It's constantly changing. It's constantly evolving. Your first assessment will never be your last assessment. It will be very far from that. It is very participatory. It requires you and the person that you're assessing to participate in a partnership with one another. Information can be derived from different sources, not just the person you're talking to. It helps us to identify the impact of the illness, the patient's resources and strengths, power dynamics within the family, and assessments, please have to be documented, revised, and updated. You have to look at whether your assessment and your goals are being aligned. Is what you're assessing actually what is helping you define the goals, or are you simply just having very, rambling inane conversations and that's really not going somewhere? So assessment has to be documented, revised, updated. It is an art, but it has to also be treated as a science. You have to build evidence for good practice through good assessment documentation. So I'm going to stop here and let's take 2 minutes to get any responses, any questions or comments anybody might have. I hope that I was able to bring something new to those of you who are very seasoned veterans. So we have another session, I think, at 4:30. So if you have any questions, please ask them now, or you can also, I think, send it across to Simia, who will forward it to me or to anybody.
How do we get a hold of the slides that you all share?
It will be sent to you.
It will be there in that login thing that we have got, or will it be sent to the email ID?
Ma'am, we are sharing the learning materials in the LMS ieco.org. You can directly log into your account and access all the learning materials.
No, the one which we've been taken through these 3 sessions.
These 3 sessions.
And these sessions are recorded. I missed 13 minutes of the beginning today. I was just driving back.
Ma'am,
so I just wanted to know.
Ma'am, the link of the recorded session will also be shared there. So you can access that.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, thank you everybody, and thanks for the messages. We'll wind up. I'm going to hold that question, demographic profile. What degree does demographic profile help? I'll just leave it at it helps to a great degree. How it helps, maybe in the next session we can do a little bit of a recap. All right. Okay. Thank you so much. Have a good.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rana.
Thank you all for joining today. Have shared the feedback link. Please kindly fill it up. We'll see you on the next session. Bye-bye.
Thank you.